Hi, I'm Tom. Welcome back to the Woodshop Nerdery. In today's video, I build these Harry Potter inspired broom holders. I originally got the idea from this collection of Deltagram magazines from the 1930s. The January 1938 issue had a small project on the second page called The Little Dutch Girl Broom Holder. And you can see here that it's a wood cutout in the shape of a Dutch girl with two pivoting arms, and the arms grab onto the broom. This is a complete project build video, which includes designing the patterns, manufacturing the parts, staining the wood pieces, and assembling. Please stick around. To get the project started, I need to assemble the templates. Here I'm putting together the templates for Harry, Ron, Hermione, and Dumbledore. Our household printer is just a normal 8.5 by 11 computer printer, so I need to print each template on 2 pages and then tape them together. Let me take you over to the computer and show you how I made these templates. I started out by taking a picture of the magazine article I showed earlier and loading it into an application called Inkscape. To properly scale the image, I draw a 1" by 1" square, and then I resize the image so that the grid included in the picture matches the 1" square. Next, I trace an outline over the arms. This allows me to capture the correct shape, size, and position. But since I'm doing Harry Potter themed characters here, I make the arms look like they're coming out of the sleeves of a cloak. Now I need to create the artwork which will define the characters. I find a great set of drawing instructions on Kathy Barbro's artprojectsforkids.org website, which give me some step-by-step instructions for drawing Harry, Ron, Hermione, and Dumbledore. I'll link to her website in the description of this video. Her drawing instructions are intended for kids to draw on paper, so I do need to adapt the instructions quite a bit to define my characters as rectangles and to make the bandsaw cutting a little more fluid. With my characters drawn, I now need to print them. I just move them 2 at a time onto the page, hit the print button from the file menu, then I rotate the characters 180 degrees and print again. And then I repeat for the other 2 characters. With the templates printed, I can get back to the woodworking. I'm going to recycle some roof sheathing that's left over from my shed. It has very rough and uneven edges, so I use the cutting guide trick that I showed in an earlier video to put one straight even edge on this piece. With one good edge on the plywood, I can now use my large panel cutting sled to rough cut the work pieces to size. This last piece is quite small, so I'm going to use a backer piece to square it up against the sled and give it a little extra support. That way I can keep my hands away from the blade. I'm about to do something a little unusual. I'm going to actually run these pieces of plywood through my thickness planer. My goal is to clean up the rough surface. This is construction plywood. Unlike typical plywood or furniture grade plywood, there are only 4 veneer layers here. There is no face layer on either side. It's just 4 thick layers. The layers are about 4 millimeters thick. So that should be plenty enough to sort of skim a light pass off the top of these and get them looking a little bit better. They're very rough at this point. This is what I started out with here on the bottom, and here's what I ended up with. So this is much more workable. I think we're going to do okay with this. To cut the portions of the shapes which are relatively straight or gently curved, I use a 1/2" bandsaw blade. To cut the portions of the shapes which are very detailed and have lots of tight curves, I switch over to a 1/8" bandsaw blade. I lightly sand each piece. I don't want to remove any wood here. I just basically want to remove the burrs and add a slight chamfer to the front face of each of these workpieces. I now have a lot of little workpieces. To keep track of them all, and so I don't get them all mixed up or lose any, I use carpet tape to stick them to a backer board temporarily. This also lets me do a little cleanup sanding. I color the pieces using Rit Dye. The first step is to apply Zinsser shellac-based seal coat to all the workpieces. The seal coat makes sure that the dye absorbs into the wood grain evenly. Here, I'm mixing up indigo blue with a little bit of cherry red Rit Dye to get Dumbledore's cloak and shirt. I add one coat to all the pieces, but for the cape, cap, and beard tie, I continue to apply coats of color to deepen the blue. You can see that even though this is the same dye mixture, I can get strongly different colors simply by adding more and more layers. The Harry Potter fans in my household would kill me if I got the Gryffindor colors wrong. So I got to get this right. I mix up a little golden yellow Rit Dye with some cherry red Rit Dye and put on a first application. I realize the color is not quite right, so I use a bamboo skewer to add a few drops of the cherry red to the mixture. The color still isn't right, so I add a few drops more, and then a few drops more until I finally get the color I want. I find it's better to sneak up on the color than to go too dark and have to sand it off and start all over. With all the color applied, I can now start gluing down each character to my backer board. I start at the top and work my way down. I fully coat the back of each piece, but on the edges, I only coat the bottom half. This is because I want to avoid glue squeeze out coming up to the top. If I do get glue squeeze out, I'll have to wipe it off with a wet rag. However, Rit Dye is water soluble, so I risk wiping off the color as well, and I really want to avoid that. While the glue sets up for the characters, I'm going to move on to creating the arms. So I'm ready to make the arms, which will be the mechanism to hold the brooms. But I don't want to make this out of plywood because the plywood I'm using can be very weak in certain points, and this is a very small area. So the only piece of scrap wood that I have is this takeoff of a piece of oak furniture I tore apart a while ago. And then I can orientate the template so that I have as much grain running in this direction through the hands, which are going to be the weakest point of this part. I apply the paper templates with spray adhesive just like I did before. But before I cut them out, I want to make sure I get these holes drilled when it's all one piece. It just will be a lot easier than trying to hold on to each piece individually. And while I'm at the drill press, I may as well drill some pilot holes to accept the screws for the pivot arms. I'm getting better at making cuts on the bandsaw, but I still need a lot of practice. I do my best to get smooth, even cuts here, but to be honest, I'm very grateful that I own a belt sander so that I can clean these up afterwards. Here, I use cherry gel stain to color the bare parts of the plywood. I'm using a tile and grout sponge as an applicator for this gel stain. I also used it as an applicator for the Rit Dye. I buy these sponges in a 3-pack for about $3. And each sponge I can cut up into about 15 or 16 applicators. This is a tip I learned from a Woodworker's Journal YouTube video. I'll link to that video in the description. Now we come to the most nerve-wracking part of this project. I was really nervous about drawing the faces on. I'd come a long way on this project and it would be so easy to screw it up now. But I took my time and I used a set of washers as templates, and I just used a regular Sharpie style marker to draw the faces. And I made a couple mistakes, but I think it turned out okay. I did go ahead and apply a few coats of spray spar urethane to the main piece and all the arms. I chose spar urethane because, well, I had some left over. So I just go ahead and apply screws and washers to each of the workpieces and use a regular hand screwdriver to gently drive in the screws. Well, that's it for this video. I want to thank you for sticking with me to the end. And please join me next week where I show you how I make these brooms, which I think make great Halloween costume items or decorations. Bye.